Honestly, if it was Kamala Harris behaving this way, they'd call her hormonal and hysterical, right? Look.
We'd have to get elected to be.
But, well, yes, and if she had been elected.
I'm really tired of hearing words like disappointed, like disturbed, like I'm bothered, like I wish he wouldn't do it. It's time that somebody looks at the camera and looks at him and calls him up and says, listen, you crazy lunatic 70-year-old man, baby, stop it.
Have you noticed that with everything going on with deportations, with everything going on in the Trump administration, have there been signs from this group of remorse?
Yes.
Trump thought it was just another media segment. Then Ana Navarro looked straight at the camera and crushed him with a line so sharp it could cut steel. She didn't just talk policy, she went straight for character, calling him a mean girl, while the entire studio froze. And just when you think she's done, she brings up something so petty yet so telling that Trump's reaction was instant. You're about to see why this wasn't just an argument, it was a televised dismantling. Before we move on, I will like you to subscribe to the channel and like the video. She didn't rush it. Ana Navarro sat back for a second, lips pressed together, one eyebrow ever so slightly raised. The chatter on the panel dipped for half a beat, and that half beat was all it took to make everyone in the studio glance her way. Then she turned her head, squared her shoulders, and fixed her eyes right into the lens. Not past it, not around it, right into it, as if Donald himself was sitting on the other side of the glass. It wasn't the fake smile TV mode look. It was the look someone gives when they're about to say something they've wanted to say for a long time. The show was just supposed to be another bland CNN segment, standard back and forth, predictable talking points, maybe a polite disagreement here and there. That's the kind of thing Trump and his media team barely pay attention to when it's on. The kind you treat like background noise until it's over. But Navarro clearly had a different agenda. No warm-up, no long preamble, no with all due respect.
With these tariffs, again, went in with a sledgehammer, caused fear, destruction, distrust, when it could have been done with a scalpel in a strategic way. That's just not the way he operates. Nicaraguan, Haitian, Cuban, and Venezuelan exile communities. And those are precisely the communities that have been the most targeted by these Trump policy changes and deportations. And
I can't start talking about tax reform. I can't start talking about healthcare reform because I can't get past the fact that we have a president who lacks the sufficient character.
She skipped every polite opening you would expect in political TV and went right in with a hit that knocked the air out of the room. She called him a mean girl. Now, normally, name-calling on cable news gets you an eye roll, but this? Calling the sitting president a mean girl didn't just poke at his politics, it sliced into the part of him that runs on image and ego. This is the guy who sells himself as a billionaire alpha, the big man in every room. In one phrase, Navarro yanked him out of the Oval Office and shoved him into the role of the petty high school queen who bullies everyone from her cafeteria table. The reaction was immediate. You could hear a slight shift in the chairs around her, the kind people do when they know something just landed hard. One panelist bit down on a smile, another started scribbling notes like they were documenting a crime scene, and then there was Twitter, which lit up mid-segment, memes flying before she even finished her sentence. Navarro didn't leave the insult hanging in midair. She twisted it into a bigger point, saying Trump had turned the presidency into something closer to a schoolyard drama than a serious leadership role. And she had examples ready. One of them was so absurd it almost sounded like satire. How Melania's name ended up plastered on the Kennedy Center Opera House, a place that had been named after a president, but was suddenly doubling as a branding opportunity. It was petty, it was narcissistic, and it was exactly the kind of thing that made her mean girl jab slice so deeply. You could tell she'd done this before. Navarro leaned into her own life experience, the way someone who's been targeted by petty power plays, knows exactly how to fire back. She pointed out that sometimes mockery hits harder than a detailed policy argument because it can knock down the image someone spends years building. And if there's one thing Trump's protective over, it's the persona. This wasn't random name calling, not even close. It was a tactical strike, humor used as a political weapon, and in front of millions, it planted the first seed in what would become his instant meltdown.
Craziness and the way that he acts, and this is not in a vacuum, because it's not just the tariffs. It's the first thing he did was attack Panama, Greenland, Denmark, Canada, allies.
You are now the president of the United States, the commander-in-chief, and you need to stop acting like a mean girl because we just won't take it. We won't vote with you. We won't work with you. We have a president who is mean.
Pisses me off so much Because, you are supposed to care about other human beings, even if they're not your friend or your colleague or your neighbor. You are supposed to care just because you're supposed to care out of humanity.
Watching it, you could almost see him fuming at the idea that someone dismissed him as a gossip monger in front of a national audience. And Navarro wasn't done. She'd started with personality, but her next pivot would take him somewhere far more dangerous for his legacy, straight into the territory of his actual record in office. After that mean girl jab, the mood in the studio shifted like someone had just flipped the lights. Navarro's face changed too. Less smirk, more steel. Her voice dropped slower and sharper, the kind of tone that says this part isn't for laughs. She stopped aiming at his ego and went straight for his record. She accused Trump of cruelty, not as some vague throwaway line politicians toss around. She made it sound like a charge in a courtroom. Navarro talked about immigrants, and she didn't speak like it was a policy debate on paper. She spoke like someone had lived through the stakes. As a Latina whose family had moved to the US, this wasn't abstract. Her parents fled instability, worked jobs no one else wanted, and built a life brick by brick. So when she described Trump's immigration policies, you knew she wasn't quoting headlines. She was pulling from a well of lived experience that made her voice tighten. She described the travel bans not just as a line in the law, but as a wall slammed down in the faces of families. Then there were the family separations, kids taken from parents and locked in facilities, the country watching footage of children crying behind metal fences. And she didn't let him off the hook for his words either. She pointed out the way he'd used his rallies to paint immigrants as threats, feeding fear because fear turned into votes. This wasn't a polite disagreement over vision. Navarro made it sound like Trump wasn't just making bad choices. He was actively using human beings as props in his political theater. She compared it to a show where suffering gets staged for applause lines, but the stage is the country and the people are real. And she went further, accusing him of normalizing something darker, the dehumanization of entire groups at the highest level of government. She said it in plain English with no spin, but the weight behind it hit like a blunt instrument. You could feel the energy in the room thicken. Then came the line that froze even the chatter of the producers behind the glass. Her community was being hunted down, short, ruthless, and impossible to ignore. You could see the other panelists register it. A couple looking at her, a couple staring down at their notes, but clearly not reading a word. That choice of words worked like a punch you don't see coming. It was over in a second, but it stayed in the air for the rest of the segment. Out of sight, the reaction in Trump world wasn't calm. Reports later said his aides started calling media contacts, spinning that Navarro was over the line. His surrogates in interviews the next day tried to laugh it off or change the subject. And him, the grumpy Trumpy Twitter blasts came not long after. Random all caps posts, ugly nicknames, and a need to get the last word even hours after the cameras went dark. But on screen that day, Navarro wasn't looking for a back and forth slap fight. She wasn't just making him mad. She was showing exactly how you strip the armor from someone who depends on performance to survive politically. Start by poking at the showman mask, then tear into what's underneath. And she was about to prove that when you expose the gap between the act and the reality, the whole thing can crack wide open. Navarro's biggest weapon wasn't just the insult or the policy hit, it was the way she stitched humor to cold, uncomfortable truth. That combo made it impossible for Grumpy Trumpy to hide behind his usual puffed up show. He could dodge stats, he could yell over critics, but he couldn't shake off a punchline that also carried real pain. Calling out bad leadership isn't only about rattling off facts, it's about making people see the cost in human terms. Sometimes you don't need a stack of charts, just someone who refuses to play along with the orange turd script and says it plain.